You can work and you can work and you can work and you can plan and you can data track and you can do everything, but you're not going to outwork bad sleep. If you had have asked me 4 years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, there's a lot of dietary tricks that you can do to like offset bad sleep. And candidly, like you can mitigate some of the damage from poor sleep in the short term. But really, if you ask me now, I will tell you that I would rather you get 8 good hours of sleep doing a diet that allows you to do that than do this diet that's perfect for body composition and sacrifice sleep. Why? Because in the short term, you might get a positive effect, but in the longer term, the sleep deprivation or that cumulative sleep debt can really impact glucose tolerance and can really impact insulin resistance, which is going to affect your body composition. Let's dive into some interesting data, but also we're going to talk about some pragmatic and tactical ways that you can test your glucose to see if you're getting good sleep, even if you thought you weren't, and vice versa. So sleep is a legit risk factor for type 2 diabetes anyway. Bad sleep, not getting sleep, it plays a role in insulin resistance. And there's a number of different mechanistic reasons as to why, but there's still, just like anything in nutrition and anything in science, it's all kind of nebulous. But what we do have is some interesting observational stuff, right? For example, there was a study that was published in the journal Lancet. This is one of my favorite glucose and sleep studies of all time. Took a look at 11 people, 11 men, and it had them go through 6 days of pretty poor sleep. Like it stopped them at 4 hours of sleep. So 4 hours of sleep, and then right after that, it had them go into 7 nights of 12 hours of sleep for some compensatory effect. Okay, well, what they did is on day 5 of each of these tests, of each of these segments, they tested their glucose tolerance intravenously, okay? But then on day 6, what they did is every 10 to 30 minutes, they tested their glucose levels for 24 straight hours. So they were really monitoring close. Within both settings, they ate the exact same macronutrient meals. Same calories, same amount of carbs, same amount of fat, same amount of protein. So they were eating the same meals, sleep deprived versus the same meals, not sleep deprived, okay? Well, pretty phenomenal results. They found that in the sleep deprived setting, glucose clearance was 40% slower. What does that mean? That means that if they were to hypothetically eat a cake and they had a bunch of, because you don't just eat a piece of cake, you eat a whole cake. If you were to eat that cake, you would have a glucose spike and it would take 40% longer for the glucose to get into the cells or ultimately clear out or even turn to fat. It's just, the fact is, it was lingering around in the bloodstream, going through all kinds of different stuff that glucose does, glycating and everything, doing bad things. Additionally, 30% lower function of insulin. So for all intents and purposes, they became like temporarily like 30% more insulin resistant. That is on day 6 that they were measuring this stuff. Okay, they could have been measuring it earlier. So who knows what's happening at day 1, day 2, day 3. Like one day of bad sleep can certainly impact your glucose tolerance, right? And impact that. But we do know after a few days of sleep deprivation, that is significant. And that is a significant enough of a number that you would absolutely positively see that if you were to prick your finger or wear a continuous glucose monitor or whatever. So if you're tracking your glucose, you can use those numbers to determine when you really are in sleep debt. Our bodies change, and there are honestly periods of time where maybe we don't need as much sleep, okay? Sleep quality is more important than sleep quantity. I will stand behind that, okay? But I can almost assure all of us that we're not getting the quality sleep that we might think we are, right? So maybe we're getting 6 hours, but we think it's good, and we do that for a week. Well, then we test our glucose and we see, wow, why is my glucose staying so much higher, staying 20, 30% higher than it normally does? Well, maybe that's a good indicator that you're having some sleep issues. And we'll talk about potential mechanisms here in just a second. Okay, it becomes very important. And I have another interesting study that was published talking about nurses and sleep deprivation there. I'm going to get to that in a second because that's fascinating and sheds some more light over a longer term, like 10-year setting. During these periods where you know you are sleep deprived because you've tested your glucose or because you just know you're sleep deprived, this is when you want to modulate your carbohydrate intake. You don't have to be keto, you don't have to be low carb, you do what works for you. The best diet is the diet you can stick to or the diet that you like, flat out, I don't care, okay? Do what works for you for the best outcome and best intake control. But When you are sleep deprived, you probably are wise to limit the carbohydrate intake a little bit, since your glucose disposal and your glucose clearance is worse and your insulin function is worse. And that can just potentially reduce that risk of high levels of blood glucose and impaired insulin sensitivity and things like that. So if you want to have snacks laying around, you don't have to be ketogenic, but I would recommend that you have lower carb, higher fat little snacks here and there. I put a link down below to a company called Thrive Market. They're today's video sponsor. This channel has sponsors, that's how we function, and Thrive is awesome. They've been a sponsor of my channel for like 4 years now. Okay, so they are an online membership-based grocery store, but the best part about them, you click a few buttons, you order what you want, and it gets to your doorstep in a couple of days. So for me, it's a convenience thing. I've got 2 small kids, a busy life. I don't even like going to the grocery store like I used to. Like now I just want it to come to me so I can keep on plugging around, playing with my kids, having fun, right? So that's what makes it super cool. So there's a special link down below, saves you 25% off your first grocery order. Okay, plus you get a free gift when you use that link down below. So trust me when I say it's a game changer for convenience, but also being able to sort by different diet type and find like lower carb, not even necessarily keto, but lower carb, lower glycemic snacks that you could have around on those days where you're more sleep deprived is what I would generally recommend. So use that link down below. Now this nurse study, published in the journal Diabetes Care, took a look at nurses that over the course of 10 years averaged about 5 hours of sleep per night. Nurses, like, you gotta love them. Like they bust their buns, like, right? Like very little sleep, working hard. So awesome, right? So they're doing that, okay, and they're tracking them. And they find that at the end of a 10-year period, on average, there was a 15 to 30% increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Now, science nerds are gonna say, well, that 15 to 30% increased risk, well, that doesn't really matter because if they've gained weight or if they've lost weight, then it's all skewed and everything like that. Well, no, newsflash, that was even after being adjusted for BMI. What that means is this increased risk, this 15 to 30% increased risk of type 2 diabetes is adjusted even if they gained weight or lost weight or their overall like BMI changed. Not saying that it's the end all be all, but it's demonstrating that the high stress lifestyle of nurses along with poor sleep is definitely or probably playing a role. It's very probable, and I'd probably bet at least my arm on it, right? So again, we don't know that sleep is the only thing, right? Stress is a confounding factor, but stress is one of those things that from a hormonal and catecholamine standpoint, we know that affects glucose too, and it's very similar pathways to the sleep side of things. We see in various literature as well that when you are sleep deprived, cortisol levels go up. We also see changes in ghrelin and leptin, which are very complicated hormones and very interesting to track, but they influence hunger, right? Hunger is so difficult, but it's so confusing. But when you have ghrelin and leptin that are all out of whack, that can absolutely influence hunger alongside cortisol being higher. So you're eating more, you're grazing more, you're eating probably hyperpalatable carbohydrate-rich foods, along with being somewhat glucose intolerant, along with cortisol dumping more glucose into your bloodstream, along with epinephrine dumping glucose out of the muscle and out of the liver into the bloodstream, you can see how it's a recipe for disaster. So what I would recommend you do is you don't have to get anything crazy expensive or whatever. You don't have to get a continuous glucose monitor. I wear one because I'm a nerd and this is literally my profession and I love doing this. But you can also prick your finger. And what you might want to do is track your glucose over a few months, especially when you're stressed, and see if it's gradually increasing. And go ahead and add up all the data and divide it by how many days, right? So if you got like, or how many readouts, right? So if you were testing your glucose 3 times a day for a month, you might want to take that number and create an average out of it, or just look at it on a chart and see if it's going up. Your fasting glucose, but also your glucose after meals. Because fasting glucose tells us some things in relationship with stress, but what's even more important, if you ask me, is how you're responding to food. Because your fasting glucose has a lot of different confounding factors as well. Stress, peripheral insulin resistance, are you fat adapted, are you glucose tolerant, all these different equations. But how you respond to food is fairly cut and dry, if you ask me. So that's what you want to do. You want to look at that data, and if you start seeing these increases that correlate with your stress and with your poor sleep, then you know that it's actually impacting your health and you need to make a change. As hard as that is, you need to find a way to make a change, because if you're starting to hockey stick, it starts to get worse. The worse that it gets, the more that it turns into a vicious cycle, and that number will start to hockey stick up. And I don't want to say you get to a path that you can't turn back from, but it's intimidating that that might happen. So test, give yourself data. Trust me, it's important. Thank you for watching, and please be sure to check out Thrive Market down below in the description.